now I'm really excited to present to you our first speaker, which is Verena Seiboth. She is ethics officer at the ISTA, at the Institute of Science and Technology Austria in Klosterneuburg. So we're really excited to meet you. And she's also a board member at the ÖAWI, so the Austrian Agency for Research and Integrity. So I will give now the stage to you, and I'm really looking for your speech.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. I will share my screen. All right. I suppose you should see my presentation mode now. If everything doesn't work at any point, please just interrupt me. So what's the plan? In the next few minutes, I will tell you a little bit about what my education was, how I arrived basically in my current position, and I'll give you some thoughts on what is relevant, what retrospectively, what might I have done different, what is relevant for me when you sort of think about your career or just your professional path throughout life. So as Tamara already said, I'm currently have the position of ethics officer, and I will also tell you what that actually is. So what did I study? I studied actually in Vienna at the TU Wien, technical chemistry. So that was the first part of my studies, which is like a bachelor studies nowadays. And then the second part, the master's studies, was back then called biochemistry, biotechnology, and gene technology. So that's where I sort of branched off towards life sciences, and my research was actually very life sciencey. During my studies, I was 1 year in the US, and then when I came back, that was at the end of my studies. I stayed in Austria for my PhD. I stayed at the TU Wien, but it was part of a large EU consortium project, so there were a lot of international collaborations and traveling to countries within Europe, which was actually very nice. And during that time, I was already co-teaching lab courses and helping out with some students. After that, I again left Austria for a while. So I was a postdoc at the University of Edinburgh for 1.5 years. Then again came back to Austria and decided that's actually a very nice country to live in, and decided if possible, I'd like to stay for at least quite a while. So I tried to get funding for my own projects, and I became a project group leader, a research group leader at the TU Wien. I had quite a few FWF projects that I got for myself. At the same time, I was embedded actually in a very large division, and I was involved in industry collaborations with pharma companies. Some of them were mentioned already in Tamara's introduction. I did some research stays in France, and at the TU Wien, I supervised students. I was teaching lectures and lab courses, and also I finally got a habilitation in biochemistry. But at that time, I already had the feeling, I had progressed through all of these steps, but I already had the feeling, actually, I might not want to stay in research. I thought, actually, science is really nice, but it does not need to be my own research. So I already started looking for other positions, and I looked in industry, I looked in research administration, because when I was still in research, I was also in the editorial board of a few scientific journals. I was editing papers or assigning reviewers to papers. I was involved in reshaping of our institute at the TU Wien. So I was involved in quite a few other processes that I found very interesting. So I decided, why not do that for a living, and sort of shape processes, shape how an institution works. So in 2015, I joined the ISTA, the Institute of Science and Technology Austria, which is at the outskirts of Vienna. We are a very young institute. ISTA was only founded, or the campus opened in 2009. We have only PhD students, from PhD students upwards, so we don't have undergrad students. And my first position here was faculty recruiting and evaluation. So I was hired to coordinate faculty recruiting processes in life sciences and chemistry. Because we are growing very fast, we add several groups per year. So this is actually a big task to sort of coordinate all these recruiting processes. And also we have a lot of evaluations to ensure that we work on an internationally high level and on a benchmark ourselves to international institutions. After a while doing that, as a side topic, I became the ethics officer. And this is sort of has become more and more time consuming for me. And at some point I switched to being full-time ethics officer. And this is what I'm still doing now. And so what is that actually? What's an ethics officer doing? And an ethics officer, or I as an ethics officer, coordinate everything on campus that is related to responsible research. So for me, there are these two topics. One is research integrity or good scientific practice, which is how you do your research. It's about the quality of your research. And I put some keywords here. It's the standards of good scientific practice, how you perform the research, fair review, authorship, having a good research environment, and of course, preventing and also investigating, if applicable, research misconduct allegations such as the falsification, fabrication, plagiarism, and so on. Research ethics, and this is what I spent actually most of my time with, is for me the content. And here are the topics listed, and here we stick to what the EU defines for EU projects as ethics. So this is what you do in your research. If you have human participants, human samples and data and animals, for all of these topics, there are a lot of rules and there's a lot of legislation, a lot of compliance. And I support our scientists with making sure that they fulfill all of these requirements and that they stick to the requirements that the funding agencies impose on us and also the legislation does. So that's ethics for me. So what do I do all day long? There are three main chapters. The first that is on this slide here is raising awareness and providing information. I teach workshops that are mandatory for all of our scientists. So I teach our PhD students, I teach our postdocs, I talk to our faculty. I also occasionally give external workshops. I organize discussion sessions on different topics such as medical genomics or artificial intelligence. I make sure that all of this information is also available online. I moderate reflection sessions for teams that work on a specific topic. I'm also an ombudsperson, so I'm go-to person for scientists, so they can come to me for confidential advice. If any allegations are brought forward, we have solid procedures to look into that. I help with grant applications and other type of contracts. So that's being the nice person. But I also am the person that sometimes raises a finger and says, well, you need to be more careful. So I do a lot of monitoring. I review projects. I review our grant applications to make sure that the scientists really, nothing sort of slips through like our attention and we overlook some requirements. A lot of evaluation and also reporting. And finally, I'm the policy advisor. So we need to have rules and guidelines. We need to have policies, flow charts. So I'm the one who's responsible to get all of that and to get it approved by the management in the end. And for that, I also participate in international and national networks, and also the Austrian Agency for Research Integrity is an important national network for us. So these are my tasks. What motivates me in my job? It never gets boring. We are a very international working environment. We have English as working language, and we are rapidly growing. So routine is the exception. And this can be tough, but it's also really enjoyable. Because, there's no year as the same as the other because we grow in such a fast pace. I enjoy the broad spectrum of tasks. As I just told you, policy advising, a lot of process management. I learned a lot of reviewing, but also I enjoy the breadth of scientific topics. And this is what's a relevant message for me. When I did research, I did my topic, and there you enjoy getting in more and more detail. But what I need to do now, in the morning, I might talk about embryonic stem cells, and in the afternoon, I might talk about artificial intelligence and the use of large databases of facial images for some computer science project. And in between, I might talk about quantum physics or whatever just comes along, collecting plants, collecting resources from the wild. So it's really broad. And I like this generalistic view because our scientists, they are at the forefront of research. So you're involved, you hear about things that others do and actually that have already achieved, because they have already results. You all know how tough it can be to arrive at your results. And so I'm in touch with that. but I sort of advise them from a different angle. Which skills are useful for this job? So I thought about that a bit. I think I'm very curious, maybe, and I'm curious about different sectors. So when I did my research on my enzymes and gene regulation, that was very nice, and I enjoyed it a lot. But I like to be even more generalistic, scientifically, as I just said, but also it's really interesting to learn more about risk assessment tools and how to run a project in a very professional way. As a PhD student, you're responsible for your project. But when I talk about a project that involves the legal affairs and scientific service units and a lot of other divisions, it's a different type of project management. It's an interesting skill to learn more about that. Whistleblowing systems, whistleblower protection, and so on. I need to know also what's shown here on the side, a lot about other topics. So ethics and integrity sort of touches on aspects like diversity and inclusion. It touches on open science. It touches on outreach, because you also want to transport that you do responsible research and so on. But all of that for me is paired with a real understanding of the research processes, because I have my own experiences. I've been through the ranks, if you wish. So, and this helps to really relate to the everyday life of a researcher. But I learned a lot about research in other disciplines, because how mathematicians or computer scientists think is very different from how we life scientists, and especially I was an experimentalist, do the job. Right. Then I thought a bit, which soft skills do I think are useful for my job? I need a lot of communication skills. On one hand, it's a teaching, a moderation, and I need to handle conflict situations. I need to negotiate with lawyers, with the management. It's not easy and challenging, and I like that. I need to network a lot within the institute and beyond. It's really a cross-cutting topic. And also, I need to have a quite independent working style. Ethics is usually a topic that's handled by very few persons at an institution. And thus, you need to be very self-organized and prioritized, because you need to push the topic yourself. So you need to push your own topic, and that's, it gives you a lot of freedom, but also a lot of responsibility, I feel. So at other institutions, people like me are called data management officer or research integrity officer or the unit head for quality management. So these are comparable or partially comparable job profiles. So finally, I have two slides with some thoughts on what are my tips if you consider leaving research or sort of going away from this research path at a certain point, because it took me quite a few years to decide that I'm really sure I really want to leave research. So first, don't wait too long. I waited very long, as you saw in the beginning. I even did my habilitation, and I was lucky to get this position that I had here in the beginning. My advice would be to actually leave earlier. I kind of forgot that on the way, because I did like my research topic. And at some point, it occurred to me again, didn't I want to do something else? So, and then if you want to leave research, get something on your CV that connects to whatever you want to do. If you want to go to industry, think about good manufacturing practice. If you, in my case, want to go to research administration, think about getting some courses, workshops, trainings about, for example, project management, or if you're interested in like financial aspects, something along those lines. Or you can also just show don't forget to show those skills on your CV if you have them. If you coordinated a project, write it explicitly. If you did any administrative tasks on the side, like working for an association at the UGMBT or ILSA, something like that, list it specifically. It is a skill. It shows that you can look beyond your research. List any internships or any other short-term work experiences that you had. So I've been at the Institute for a while, so I have seen quite a lot of applications also for administrative jobs here. So you need to have something, my advice is to have something that sets you apart from a typical research CV. So study, PhD, postdoc maybe, what else? And make sure that you explain why you want to leave research and why you are interested in this position. You don't need to sell that this is like this particular position that you're applying for is your dream job ever, but there must be a good reason why you want to leave research other than I don't have any funding anymore, because usually there will be other applications that can do better than that, and this doesn't give you a good chance to get the job that you might want. And finally, consider that the first step might be the most difficult one. I have colleagues, and I think that told me, and I think it's a good idea, that's why I'm mentioning it, that told me, I first applied for some maternity or paternity replacement or some time-limited contract because this got me the job experience to sort of polish up my CV and then get a permanent job. Or be flexible with the tasks for your first job. There's the grant office, every university or every institution has a grant office. There's communications and outreach, different types of evaluation jobs, student affairs, like managing the student life cycle, coordination of large projects. So all of that can be quite interesting to get you some skills and maybe also give you some idea what you might want to do as a next step. And the final advice or thought from my side is don't worry, because I do believe that, or I firmly believe that switching jobs once you have left research is actually potentially easier and faster than in research. If you don't like it, you will leave, you will find another again, because it's not like in research where you need to work for a few years to finish the project, to get the paper, which is actually necessary to give you the next good job. It's a bit more flexible, I feel, in other sectors. And I think that's, for me, for how I think, this is an advantage because it feels less restricted, I would say. So this was a quick rundown of what I have done and what my thoughts on that would be. So I think that's at the end of my slideshow, and I think I'll stop sharing the screen.
Thank you very much, Verena. So I would like to open the discussion. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask whatever you want. This is the purpose of such events. Write them in the chat or just say them, ask them. I will read them also from the chat, so feel free to ask. So we have one question in the chat. It's from Elena. Thank you for the nice overview on the job profile on an ethics officer. How problematic do you think is the Kettenvertragsregel in the research administration? Or does it play a big, or does it not play a big role? So what's your opinion on that?
I suppose you mean the Kettenvertragsregel, really, if you work in research administration, or do you mean from the point of view of a research administrator? So for research administration, if you really work in research administration, usually the contracts are unlimited. So we offer usually unlimited contracts. The Kettenvertrag.
I think for the researchers.
So at least, I mean, this is how I know it here. Unless you're employed on a project, if that's EU funded, that has a special job for someone, then it would be a time limited contract. But other than that, it's usually unlimited contracts. So in that sense, it's not such a problematic topic. I think this is more a topic that applies to the researchers that don't have a permanent position and need to fund themselves for project after project.
Yeah, I think just out of the ethical view, how ethical is this way of working? I think that was also part of the question. If you can only just work there for 3 years and then, that's it. What's the opinion of an ethics officer on that?
In administration, I really have not come across this as a big problem, because the time-limited contracts are usually, I think, because the perspective is a different one. If you take up a time-limited contract, the employer usually really can already tell you if this is for sure time-limited, or if there might be a chance that you can sort of stay. So it's a bit different, I think, because I think it's really not such a problem, because there's an institution has a certain set of administrative positions, and this institution will strive to fill that with people that have an unlimited contract. It's really different from the research business, where you have the permanent positions, and then you have this large crowd of people that need to fund themselves from project to project to project. This really does not exist in that way in administration, for example. So that feels, I think, it's a relief to sort of not be confronted with that issue. Because, of course, I was also one of those for a while that was funded by a project. I then got an unlimited contract at the TU Wien, which I decided to leave still. But it's a very stressful situation, this time-limited contract. And I think it's, from the integrity point of view, I think it's not good for the research system, because it puts a lot of pressure on the scientists to perform. And this does not give you the relaxed freedom that you should have to do good research. But that's, away from my position towards the topics that I handle.
Yeah, that's, I think, a big topic. So, but there is another question. So, do bigger institutes or universities have ethics departments, like all of them, or is it a unique thing from ISTA? And how big is that department in your institute?
So it's not unique. We are, here at ISTA, it's actually quite small, because I do the main job, and I do that in collaboration with colleagues in grant office, for example, or in the scientific service unit. So at ISTA, it's actually one or two people who do the main bulk of the job here. But most institutions, so let's now talk first about other countries, have a small team that handles that. So from what I know from colleagues in Europe, it's usually a team of 2 to 4 people that handles, either they call it responsible research or research quality management or research integrity office. So it's usually a small team that does cross-cutting topics and sort of sets up the overall procedures. In Austria, it's not so common yet. But for example, the TU Wien has set up also a responsible or an ethics office. So they also now have a small team that is starting to set it up. So it's becoming also more frequent and also more common in Austria, actually, that universities become more structured with respect to handling these topics.
Really good. So there are a few positions also. You also mentioned like other names for that same way of career path. So that's
it's research integrity office. That's the international term in some countries and also in the US. I think what many institutions are now setting up is units or offices, at least, that help with the data management. It's the data protection regulation. If you have large data, the medical university, for example, they have these large biobanks. So they have very interesting people that are very knowledgeable on, IT and scientific aspects of, for example, medical images. But on the other hand, they need to know quite a lot about the legislation because of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. So, that's a subtopic of research of integrity and ethics to handle that. And I think this data stewards, for example, is a subtopic of that now more and more institutions are setting up. So that was one example that I mentioned. And it's interesting to talk to those people because they are real experts on IT and legal stuff. And they really know, in a way that the researchers need to understand what they're talking about. It's really nice to listen to them.
Nice, thank you. Yeah, I think also this topic of data safety is getting more and more important. So I have a question as well. So what are the difficulties of working in an interdisciplinary institute? As you said, you sometimes also have to deal also with physics, for example.
Yeah. But the experimentalists are for me easier to they're closer to what I did than the theorists. So the challenges are that you need to, for example, set up workshops, or you need to teach students from all disciplines, and there will always be some, like if you have theoretical mathematics, like pure mathematics, well, there is no ethics topic in there. And then you get this feedback from some of them, I don't want to listen to that, it doesn't apply to me. And also some group leaders might think along those lines. So you permanently need to reevaluate where you're standing, what's the minimum level of knowledge that you need to transport to all of them. And you need to understand how they tick. And also, so on one hand, you need to sort of still find a way to sort of explain to them why you and the institute think it's still relevant that they listen to what they need to listen to. And on the other hand, you also need to know enough about topics like artificial intelligence and machine learning to see where the ethics topics are. Because I need to screen or monitor or review our grant applications, our PhD projects. And the way we do that, of course, is we have a so-called self-assessment. So I have a set of questions, and the researchers need to answer the questions about their project. But then I will take their answers and compare that to what they have written in the grant application or in the project. So it starts with a self-assessment, but still I need to understand some of that, also to provide advice. And that's the challenge. It's very nice because I learned a lot. I learned a lot about how computer science works, how mathematics works. From the, when I say works, I mean from how the research environment ticks. What's relevant for them? What's their working mode? How do they interact? What's relevant for them? It's quite different from experimentalists. And I just give one example. So in the workshops, and I also learned that the scientists don't know that about the other fields. So we regularly in my workshops have as an example a discussion about authorship. And there are many fields that have alphabetical authorship, or just one or two authors. So those people are always then very surprised to hear how complex authorship is in the life sciences, with first author, last author, equal first author, contributing author, and so on. And by now I know all of these facets of that, and I enjoy it again, over and over again, when the researchers have these revelations, when they talk to their colleagues during my workshops.
Sounds really interesting. And also, it's also nice to work in an interdisciplinary institute where you can really interact with each other. So my last question, and this is something I ask like every speaker, is if you could give your younger self one advice, like just one, what would it be?
I should. It would not have brought me to ISTA but my advice would have been after my postdoc in Edinburgh. My advice would have been apply for an industry position. I didn't apply because I was so focused on continuing what I had sort of started to discover during my postdoc. My advice would be open up your mind and become more open-minded, actually. Apply for an industry position. I think that would be it, although it might sound, it's not, it's quite.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So to stay broad, like to see also other perspectives.
Yeah, I really forgot it. I mean, this is maybe an advice. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I was a bit narrow-minded at that point, but maybe it's a useful advice for some of the younger people that are listening.
Thank you for your advice. And I would now go over to our second speaker. So Doris Wilflingseder, university professor at the Institute of Hygiene and Medical Microbiology at the Medical University of Innsbruck. Welcome. I really look forward to your talk and your advice. So the stage is yours.
Okay, thanks, Tamara, for the nice introduction, and also the and also the invitation to this really exciting seminar. I think thanks also, Verena, to your interesting insights into the ethics officer. I think we have some things in common and probably some things are totally different. And today I'm happy to provide you my side of how I became university professor. I hope you can see everything. If something is not going right, also just interrupt me, please. Sorry. Right. Okay. Sorry. I also divided my talk into education, career paths, experience, key responsibilities, and soft skills. But during making the talk, I just sensed that everything is somehow interwoven. So I didn't strictly separate these things, but incorporated them in the single path. So as you all know from your CVs, your writing, it always looks so straightforward what you did. First, you go to high school, then you make your MSc. Now you're also making BSc, but at the time when I did it, we did not have this. And then your PhD. Afterwards, you start with a postdoc. And if you stay in academia and you're lucky, you stay at university. But as most of us will know, it is not as straightforward as given in the CVs which we are writing. And here I just wanted to show you how my career and everything ran. And as you can see, I already somehow described it as a maze, because after high school, I went for a short term into the USA as an au pair. And in 1989, I started studying biology with zoology as a main focus, because I always wanted to become an ethologist, never wanted to go into a lab. And therefore, I decided to go into zoology. But during the studies, I really fell in love with cell biology. I made some courses and then I made even more courses in the second part of my studies. And therefore, I, in the end, decided to go into a lab, but just in terms of doing cell biology, doing signaling, doing immunology. And therefore, I made my master in science between 1995 and 1997 at the Institute of Physiology. I will come to that a little later once more. Between my master's and my PhD, I took a 4-month time out where I traveled, where I went to Australia, New Zealand, and Indonesia. And I really have to say that this was really one of the best times of my life. And I would really recommend you, if you have some gaps in between, travel around, get to know people, if time allows, of course, and also money allows. But I really have to say that this was really a very good time when I also thought about how to go on. And this is what I did then in 1998. There were not as many PhD positions around. Therefore, I started a more biochemical PhD thesis at the theoretical surgery. So I did not always stay in the same area of research. I jumped around a bit, which on the one hand has the advantage that you just see more. On the other hand, you are not that focused as other people who do the same topic from BSc to MSc to PhD, and therefore you always have to refine yourself again. As said, on the one hand, it's an advantage because you have a broader sight. On the other hand, it's a bit tricky to always get into the new topic. And therefore, as said, it's advantage and disadvantage at the same time. When finishing my PhD, there were not really postdoc jobs around. So therefore, I just applied at institutes of the university where I thought they do really an interesting research. And I was lucky to get a half-day position as a postdoc at the hygiene and medical microbiology, which I also accepted. Although at the same time, I would have also gotten a full-time postdoc position, but more on a biochemical, more in a biochemical area. And I decided to take the half-time position because there at the hygiene, they were working on host pathogen interactions. I had the chance to work with human immunodeficiency virus 1, which I then also did. I worked on signaling mechanisms in dendritic cells. And then during the time there, I was fortunate to get a full-time job after 3 months already. So I had the chance to stay at the hygiene. And during this first postdoc time, I wrote several proposals which were not accepted, but never give up. Rewrite the proposal and resubmit it again. It's easier said than done because in the beginning you are always really down when you get a rejection. But after 2 years, I was having my first success in terms of getting a proposal granted. So really stick to really rewrite, and resubmit, because this is something which always comes when you are staying in research. During this first proposal, I went as a visiting scientist to the University College of London, where I also wrote a follow-up grant to my first grant, which was granted then in 2009. At the same time, I did my habilitation in immunology. And then from 2012 on, I was Vice Director at the Institute of Hygiene and Medical Microbiology. I got a tenure track position at the Medical University of Medicine. And during this time, you have to perform qualifications, which you have to which you have to fulfill. And if you fulfill this qualification, you're associate professor. So first, when I got the tenure track, I was an assistant professor. And then if you fulfill the qualification, you're an associate professor. During that time, of course, I always, again, wrote several grants and then built up my own small work group. And and between 2012 and 2022, I got several third-party fundings accepted, also from the National Institutes of Health. So also look outside of Austria where you can get funding. And I think that's really also important to not just stick to Austria, but also looking outside. And sometimes you're then also lucky to get, for example, an NIH grant. And in 2019, I was assigned university professor for infection biology. And here you can see my group now, my recent group at the Institute of Hygiene and Medical Microbiology. And as you can see, this is not a very big group, but it's also not too small. But I think it has the right size because we have I have 2 postdocs, 4 PhD students, 3 technicians, and 1 master student right now. And I think that's a really good size. And I'm really happy to have this nice working group of different areas also. So we have chemists, we have molecular medicine students, we have biologists. So we are a really diverse heap of people who complement each other. And I'm also happy that I got the support over all the years of our director, of Cornelia Lasfleur, because she always really liked what I did and always supported me. And this was really also a great luck, I have to say, which I had. And I just want to give you an overview how the tasks change from MSc, PhD to going now to the professorship. So as I told you before, I was always interested in cell biology, immunology, interactions of pathogens with the host, and all is circulating around human disease. And this was something which really follows me throughout my whole career, and which I was really trying to push forward. And during the lab days, so during MSc, PhD, and also postdoc, of course, you extensively work in the lab, you do lots of troubleshooting, you have to be a team player, and I think this is also something which is really very important. And you have to start presenting your data in conferences, in meetings, at workshops. And this also then further leads you to starting to network with different people. And in your early postdoc years, you start also supervising students, which also brings you forward if you want to do your habilitation, if you want to do teaching. And this is what I then also did. So I did quite a lot of teaching, wrote grants and papers, and in the end, you're more like a manager. So it's really something like a circle around these topics which I'm working at. And what I always had in mind was I did not want to do animal experimentation. And in particular, in the 1990s, most of the things were done in mice, and it was really hard to find a diploma thesis where you could really just work in vitro, just work with cells. So I looked around in Innsbruck where I could join to not having to do any animal experimentations, because, as I said, I was always interested in human disease. So I found that there were really two pioneers in terms of alternatives to animal experimentation at the time in Innsbruck. And this was Walter Pfaller and Gerhard Strandal at the physiology in Innsbruck. And at that time, they already built their own perfusion systems. They let the cells grow in a polarized state on filters. And this was really something which I was interested in. So I was lucky to get the master thesis there. And now I really try to continue and promote also their work, and founded myself the MUI Medical University of Innsbruck Animal-Free Research Cluster, together with a very interdisciplinary team. And this is just the core team of the MUI Animal-Free Research Cluster. And what do we want to do? We want to strengthen interdisciplinary collaborations in terms of alternatives. We want to bundle our expertises to promote the alternatives to animal testing. We are also doing seminars, but most importantly, we want to teach students and junior scientists about the alternatives, because you are the ones who are the PIs of the future. And therefore, it's really important that you get to know what possibilities you have. And therefore, this is something which I really initiated at the Medical University of Innsbruck in my position as a university professor. And this is something which also Verena already told. So always stay curious, stay creative, do your own things, because that's what I also did. Because as said, when I did my PhD or also postdoc, I was often really challenged with the way that proposals were rejected, papers were rejected, because we did not have any in vivo experiments in mice. But I said, I don't want to make this. I want to explore human diseases. So therefore, I'm further developing human models. And that's what we did over the last years. So that's what I'm doing together with my work group. So we are trying to make really good immune competent 3D models. set them out to perfusion and microfluidic techniques, and always combine it with also immune components and immunologic topics. And that's what I just really want to tell you, that if you have an idea, if your idea is good and it's always also funded, really stick to that idea. Don't let yourself being drawn away from your path just because the fashion is that everybody does it, for example, like this. And we did not do this. And I think we now have really very predictive models, because on the one hand, we are working with cell culture models, so with these really complex cell culture models. On the other hand, we have a really good collaboration with the Tirol clinics, and we get patient materials, and we get patient materials and data from cell culture together with the patient materials really are very predictive tools to say, to make to really say how, for example, infection or possible therapeutic approaches can be made. We all also combine this with in silico analysis and have a really good collaboration also with the bioinformatics units. And I think those three tools together really are highly predictive and really valuable in terms of research. And this is just what I wanted to show you in terms of our research. So we have, for example, an air liquid interface model, which is totally animal free. We seed our cells in a birch-based cellulose. This is what I wanted to show you, because you just have to look around on how you could improve the conditions in your cell culture and really use materials which are normally not coming to your mind in the first thought. And we seed the cells in the cellulose. They are nicely differentiated. You get a really nice respiratory system and can have many readout parameters, for example, after SARS-CoV-2 infection. And the second system we are working with are lung organoids, and these we can also infect or can also therapeutically treat. And this system is really very nice in terms of high throughput testing of lots of drugs or new medications. So therefore, those two systems really complement each other. And both systems were really optimized and established by PhD students in the lab, by postdocs in the lab, and really bring their career, I think, also forward, because they have really nice publications. And all this would not be possible without third-party funding, as also Verena told before. So that's also a task you really have to do when you're staying at the university. You always have to look in time that your research is really funded, because then you can really freely research, which I think is really very important if you stay at the university. And another thing, where researchers are really where you can see how they are and how they act, are of course publications, and this is also a very important factor. But if you have a good group where you can work, if you have enough third-party funding, then of course you can also probably have good publications. And I think one comes into the hand of the other, and therefore this is something just going on like that. And as I told you before, nothing is a one-man show, and you always have to collaborate. And for example, I have a really good collaboration in our institute with a tenure-track professor, Wilfried Posch, and his group, and together we can really learn a lot from each other. And that's also something which I want to tell you, that it's really important to not sneaking on what someone's doing, but really collaborating. And last but not least, of course, the teaching is something which is really a priority in my opinion, because this is something, as said, that also shapes the new generation of PIs, the new generation of professors, and which could also sometimes initiate shifts or paradigm shifts in terms of how to analyze something. And that's what I did in terms of the MUI Animal-Free Research Cluster, because there were lots of teaching in the different studies in terms of experimental, animal experimental courses, but nothing in terms of alternatives to animal testing. So I went to the vice rector for study affairs and talked to him, and he was really happy about my proposal to also include this course into the curriculum. And this is what we did now at the Medical University of Innsbruck. So we now have already in the master studies, in the molecular medicine master studies, and also in a pharmaceutical sciences master studies, we have alternatives to animal testing, but also in all our PhD programs. So therefore, it's really good to see that you can change things also within the university. And last but not least, of course, you can also make awards with your research, which was also really nice this year, because Peter Ertl and we were both rewarded the Austrian State Prize for Promotion of Alternative Methods. And this is also something which really gives back a lot, and also gives back a lot to the whole environment and to the whole work group here at the university. I hope I could have shown you that as a university professor, this job is really versatile, highly versatile, because on the one hand, you're a teacher, on the other, you're a researcher, on the other, you're a manager, you have to supervise students. So you have to do lots of combinations. But the most important is be yourself, stay curious, be creative, and also enjoy the time outs, because I think this is also really important. And I'm quite a lot out in the nature also with my dogs. And so therefore that's also, I think, really important. And as said, it's always collaborative, and also really nice to have collaborations within different areas of research, because we collaborate with physicians, we collaborate with biologists, with molecular medicine physicians, and also we also partner up with industry. So therefore, it's really a highly diverse environment. So with this, I want to thank you for your attention, and I hope I could have given you some insight into the life of a professor.
Yeah, thank you very much for your motivating words. Especially, I really enjoyed the labyrinth, because as a student, when you look at the CVs from several professors, you always think, yeah, that's a one-way track. Like, so everything's so structured, perfect. So thanks for that insight. And also, are there any questions? So just feel free to ask and take the opportunity. I would have a question for which advice would you give your students for publishing their first paper, for example?
I would always the first paper is always mostly written together with the supervisor, of course, but I think it's really important that you have your so what I do is to look first at the results I have, then I just order those results. So to have really a streamlined paper, to have a really good point you're making out of which. And what we are doing is to really, trying to poke high in the beginning. So we really submit our papers wherever we think we could best submit it. Often it's then rejected, but of course, then you have to resubmit it to another journal. It really depends on the topic you're working on, but we really try to sell our point best because we think that our research is really creative, new in terms of the models and everything. So therefore, I think it's good to really try to sell it as good as possible. But of course, not somewhere into the stars, because I think that's something which might not be possible. But yeah, I think it's really important to have a streamlined draft of your paper and know which point you really want to get out and which you want to highlight, and not to make it too complicated and everything. So it's really, of course, it also depends on how good the data are and which data you have, of course.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? So I would really like to know, which advice would you give for people staying in academia to deal with all the pressure and all this competition also, because it's not always easy, as we also heard.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to tell first too, because as you talked before about the chain contracts and everything, that's also something which is pressurizing and which is also pressurizing young people. And I think that's also something which would need to be changed at the university, because this is something which I think is not the best, because you don't get any continuous research in principle. How I coped with this was to really trying to team up with people where I thought that I have really a nice and positive environment. Of course, you have to really cope with all those frustrations of getting rejected and getting pushed back somehow. And as you said, also being competitive. But what we found was that we had some kind of niche which we found in our research, and this also brought together really good people, and this is also something in a university environment which I really like, because of course it's competitive and lots of pressure, but you get to know really some kind of free spirits, and you get to know really interesting people. And this is what motivates, really, what still motivates me. Also, I'm quite an old old guy in research, but this is something which I still really enjoy, to get to know those really cool people with whom you can also do cool things. And that's what I really like. And also the freedom that you can do your research. And I think this really weighs out also the competitiveness, the pushing, and also the often frustrating things.
Thank you. I saw we have one question from Elena in the chat. So you switched research topics and institutes a few times during your career. And when you give advice to your students, for example, after their PhD, would you rather recommend switching research topics or going abroad and staying within the same topic?
I think, as I told before, that both has its advantages and disadvantages. I mean, a friend of mine, she's also a university professor, so she stayed in the topic of she's in her topic since her master's, and in between she went abroad for 2 years, but still stayed in this topic. And I think we are about the same level. So I think it really also depends on you personally, whether you are more the type who sneaks into different topics, or whether you would stay in the same. I mean, I really have to say that at the time when I did my PhD, I also wanted to stay in the same topic as during my master's, but there were no PhD positions available, and therefore I was forced to change the topic if I wanted to make a PhD. And but now afterwards, I mean, for me it was good, but I think for my friend it was good to stay in the same topic. I think, I mean, as said, it's really hard to say which is better.
And how would you say, what are some advices to get into a new topic? Like, what are the key things, or what are the something you didn't know before?
I think also here curiosity is a driving force, because I mean, I really started with immunology just in my postdoc years, and immunology is really a topic which is really that broad and really sometimes confusing. And but in the end, I have habilitated in immunology. So therefore, I think curiosity and also interest, because I learned immunology for my PhD defense, and there I came into touch with immunology, and this really fascinated me and interested me, and that's why I also applied at the hygiene at that time, because I knew they were doing, on the one hand, host virus interactions in terms of immunology, and that's what really fascinated me and what I really wanted to do.
Thank you very much. So, as always, staying curious. I would have also the same question for you, and if there are no other questions, it will be the last question. So, if you could give your younger self one advice, what would it be?
Be yourself. Because I mean, it's often hard, because you really sometimes, of course, have to step a bit back. But I think it's really important to stay yourself and don't do anything you don't want to do. And I think that's really something which I would recommend.
Thank you very much. A big thanks to both speakers. And I hope that the stories of our speakers inspired you as well to be yourself and go your way. Doesn't matter if it's in academia or industry or wherever. And yeah, overall, we hope we brought you a better insight of all the career opportunities in the life sciences. And we wish you a really nice holiday season. And yeah, a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you also from my side. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Bye.